Something popped up on my screen.
Yep. I'm recording this for folks who
Right.
can't join us right now, so it's just confirming that.
No,
And
I
I
just
also
wanted to
muted
make
the
it
host.
go away so that I could see.
Okay.
I have a couple of requests. First of all, a question, and that's part of our session is going to be just with me telling you different parts of my life, and I will try in that part of it to be quite specific as to some of the questions that you submitted. And I just want to make a comment about those questions. It's interesting. I get questions from lots and lots of students. And the beautiful part of it is I can tell an awful lot about you from the questions that you pose. And what I know about those of you who are sitting there now looking at me is you are an amazing, amazing group of young people. And I mean that sincerely. The questions were sincere. The questions were sensitive. Some of the questions were things that I would expect adults to ask, not necessarily people your age. And that tells me something about where your heads are and where your feelings are. And so what I'd like to do today is to talk to you within the context of the questions that you asked. And then for the second half of our session together, can I just get a little bit of feedback? Do we have student interviewers who are going to be posing questions to me?
So I asked teachers to brainstorm about students who might be comfortable coming up and asking you questions.
What I did is, because I had a couple hundred questions, and obviously we didn't have time for that, is I tried to take the content of the questions and to kind of blend what I got from both of the schools and to pull it together into questions that covered some of the overlap. Did the students get those questions? Do they have those questions?
The ones you sent yesterday?
Yeah, that's important for me to know.
I sent those along to teachers yesterday afternoon.
Okay, can we find out whether there are students who are going to be asking me those questions? Because if not, I'm going to have to do a quick switch.
Sure. Teachers, can you just type in the chat if you have a handful of students who'd be comfortable addressing that list of 10 questions? One of my schools says yes.
Okay, good. So then the plan is that somewhere around 11 o'clock, I'm not tied to that specifically, but somewhere around 11 o'clock, we'll switch over to questions. And the way that works is that the interviewers can pick any question that they like. The questions are not in any particular order. I will respond if the person who asked the question feels that they'd like to expand on it or that it didn't answer it fully enough. They get a follow-on question, and we'll do as many of the questions as we can. Teachers okay with that? Is that clear? Teachers, if you have a question, please, chime in and let us know. But let me begin right now. My name is Ruth Weiner, you know that. I was born Ruth Frosch, and Frosch is a German word for frog. And I spent most of my childhood being known as the little frog, not particularly flattering, but everybody thought it was cute. I was born in the year 1931 in Vienna, the capital of Austria. I will spare you the arithmetic. That means that I'm 91 years old, which is really very old, except, and this is kind of worth noting, I'm actually among the very youngest of the Holocaust survivors. And that's of some importance because I'm among the very last of the actual personal witnesses who experienced this. And what I like to always say is my story might be interesting to some of you. And if it's not, just check in with anybody else because there are as many stories as there are survivors and as there are people who didn't survive. What happened, and this is why we're studying the Holocaust and why somebody like me who maybe doesn't love talking about it winds up talking about it and doing it with a great sense of need and response to a need and dedication, and why it's terribly important for intelligent, well-intentioned young people like yourselves to be listening. And, you know, there's something almost painful about a beautiful sunshiny day like today. And, you know, school's kind of winding up and it would be fair to say that chances are good that if you haven't learned something this year by now, yeah, you're not going to learn a whole lot of new things. I hope you'll learn this. Why? The Holocaust has set a record for enormity in terms of what one group of people can do to destroy another whole group of people. And we're witnessing it right now. Unfortunately, people are capable of doing very terrible things to each other. And I think some of what you're studying now, and God bless you for studying it, it is not fun stuff. But it's very important to learn. One little message that I'd like to leave you with is that, as I said before, it's a beautiful day. Who wants to be talking about bad things? And these are really bad things. But the only thing worse than talking about bad things with each other and trying to puzzle them out is not talking about bad things with each other. Because the terrible things that happen between people, if they're not talked about, only grow and spread, and they become like a disease, like a cancer, and they eventually have terribly bad outcomes. And this is what happened with the Holocaust. The part of it that I experienced, and I'll tell you a couple of stories in a minute. Part of it that I experienced was the very, very beginning. Hitler, you all know who he is, uh, did kind of an experiment. He said, well, the Austrian people speak German. The Austrian people right now are in a bad place economically. The Austrian people are in a bad place psychologically because World War I was between what was known as the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And if you haven't talked about that, ask your teachers. It was one of the hugest, most dominant, not just in terms of power, but in terms of culture and in terms of everything that was good, believe it or not, about Europe. Uh, and then came World War I, and they lost World War I. And where Vienna had been the royal capital of an empire, of a huge empire, dominated most of the European map, all of a sudden it was nothing. And the world that I was born into was a society that still very much mourned who they had been. And what it did is it opened them up to somebody who was a madman, which is what Hitler was, and who came and who said to them, I will restore you to your former glory. I will make you part of an even more powerful empire. And not only that, I'm going to give you somebody that you can blame for this terrible thing that happened to you. And the somebody that he gave them to blame was the same somebody that has been throughout centuries and centuries scapegoat, the scapegoat for all kinds of national situations and historical situations, and for no other reason than they were a very small people. Uh, and the only thing they shared, they existed in, by the way, pretty much every country in the world. And the only thing they shared was a common way of worship. And I think you've all figured out by now that I'm talking about the Jewish people. And uh, I'm going to totally divert for a minute. If any of you have ever had the opportunity to travel to Israel, and if you haven't, I hope you'll take it because it's an amazing place, and you want to really have some fun, then what you do is you get on a bus and you look at the people around you, and you know that almost all of them are likely to be Jewish, and you try to figure out where they are from. And I guarantee you, you cannot do it. There are Jews who are Black, there are Jews who are brown, there are Jews who are Arab, and not much is known about that. There are Jews who are European in background, there are Jews from Australia, there are Jews from England, there are Jews from America. And as I said, the only thing they have in common is that for Passover, they'll all have a Seder. When comes Christmas time, they won't have a Christmas tree. They'll be celebrating Hanukkah and a few other things like that. If you have Jewish friends or if you happen to be Jewish, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, excuse me. So Hitler came up with the idea that if you gave first the Germans and then the Austrians a common scapegoat, that you could take that pretty far. And he created something called the Aryan race. There is no such thing. If you study anthropology, you know that there is no such thing as the Aryan people. But Hitler was very good at persuading his population that there was, that they were vastly inferior, that if you wanted to know who they were, you could have them walk around with an ID, because in Europe, everybody carries an ID. And what they had to do was, if you're a woman and you had long hair, you had to pull your hair back. For a guy, it was easy. You just turned your head. If you saw their left ear, you would immediately know that they were part of this inferior race, okay? Totally made up, totally false. People's left ears and right ears might not be identical, but there is absolutely nothing about your left ear that indicates who you are or what you are like. I mean, it is like many things that unfortunately you hear or you see on the internet today. Complete fiction out of somebody's fevered brain. Okay. But we all had to walk around with an ID with our left ear showing. Okay. I led a wonderful life until Hitler came in. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about that life. First of all, let me show you a picture of what I looked like. And please tell me if the picture is not fully visible, okay? Okay, this picture was taken when I was about 7. And if some of you are saying, what is a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, which is, you know, what I'm reporting from, know about these things, I'm going to tell you 2 things that I think will help you understand. The first thing, and I think any Holocaust survivor will tell you the same thing. The first thing is that your childhood flew right out the window 24 hours after Hitler marched in. Okay. And Hitler marching in was a phenomenal event. It was something that occurred literally overnight. The streets were covered, and Vienna is a beautiful city. It has, the streets are all very wide, there are avenues, a lot of trees, a lot of public parks. If you ever have a chance to go. It's definitely one of the great cities of the world. And presented a perfect background for what the Nazis did. They marched in huge, massed, very organized parades is the only way to call them. If any of you happen to see on the news, the Russians recently did a celebration in the streets of Moscow, and that's what it looked like. Except there was red bunting with swastikas, and I'm sure you all know what a swastika looks like. Everywhere you went, there were flags everywhere. Um, One of the questions that one of you asked was, what did Nazis look like? Well, they looked like you and me and the adults in your life. They were just ordinary people. The Nazis that marched in were well uniformed. There was the SS in their black uniform with lightning bolts on their collars. That was their signifying emblem. There was what they called the SA, which had khaki round hats, and they were dressed in khaki. Then there was the Hitler Youth, which would have been guys your age, maybe a little older, and they had uniforms. There were the Hitler girls, and uniforms were very popular, and a lot of people joined the Nazi Party because having that uniform and being part of something was something that was of great psychological appeal to them. And there were two other things in my life that made it very easy for me to grow up very fast. One of them was that I learned how to read at a very young age because the streetcars in Vienna, and they have to this day, they all have letters. And German is a phonetically reliable language. You don't have to learn how a letter sounds or, all the sounds that it has, like we do in English. Once you learn the letter, that's it. You know it. You just build your words like you build with I don't know what, Legos or something. It always fits together and it always makes sense. So I was an only child. My main amusement was reading. And we had a lot of newspapers in my house. Dr. Seuss hadn't started writing yet. And so I read newspapers, and that would help a lot. And then the other thing was that I came from a very large family of adults. And I'm going to show you all the uncles and aunts that I had on my father's side. Okay. And this was a very lovely group of very cultured people, and I'm biased, but there's almost every profession that you could ask for. There are music teachers. One of them was the rehearsal conductor for the Vienna Philharmonic. Lawyers, business people. One of the women was the first woman bank teller, which now that's not a big deal because everybody, most of your bank tellers are women, but in those days they weren't. And she was a bank teller as a Jewish woman in a non-Jewish bank. And if I tell you the countries that each of these people fled to or were deported to, we've got Italy, we've got Yugoslavia, we've got Turkey, we've got Israel, we've got Australia, Uh, Many of them went off to concentration camp uh, and were murdered. And we're just very typical of almost any Jewish family that I could be holding up a picture of. Family was very assimilated. I'm going to show you a picture of my parents and myself, and I don't know how much you can see of what we're wearing, but honest, I'm not making this up. Those shorts on my father are leather pants, and then he's got an embroidered jacket on. My mother and I have a dirndl on, if you've ever heard that word. Dirndl is the folk costume of Austria. It is to this day. And they're very pretty. They're very colorful, and the aprons are embroidered, and the blouses are embroidered. Uh, and we were really hiking in the mountains. And here, if you were to do that, you'd put on probably your most comfortable jeans and a pair of hiking boots, maybe a sweatshirt if it's cold. But that was what you were to be comfortable. That was how assimilated we were. Was it comfortable? No, it wasn't. Okay, but that was who we were. And I went to first grade in the same school as my mother. And one of the questions that you submitted was, how did we know that the Nazis had come in? Well, obviously, what I just described to you, the kind of public thing. But let me tell you a very personal little story, and I think that'll bring the message home to you. I was in, as I said, the same elementary school that my mother attended. It was a very old school. But that was fine. And I had a wonderful teacher, and I had a lot of very good friends. And I had one friend in particular who was not Jewish. And one day she comes in, and she has her arm in this huge plaster cast. And it was her right hand, and she could not do anything, couldn't put her coat on, couldn't write, couldn't handle a book, nothing. I already knew how to read and write, so the teacher said, would I please be her helper and not leave her side? And I was, and I didn't. And, we were good buddies, so the no big pain there. Until one day I came in and I sat down next to her. Her name was Kitty. And I said, okay, Kitty, what would you like me to do? And she looked straight at me, and she spits in my face. And I was shocked because, I was not that kind of kid, and she wasn't that kind of kid. She spits in my face, and I said, why did you do that? What are you doing? And she said, you're a Jew. And the teacher by then, took note of what was going on, and immediately separated us, and, had somebody go help her. And gave me something else to do to try to make me feel better. And I can feel to this day what that felt like. And it was a little bit of saliva. I was certainly not physically harmed by it. And when I went home that afternoon, I told my parents what had happened. They explained to me that her father probably had joined the Nazi party, and that they had told her under no circumstances was she to be with her Jewish friend. And, what does a first grader know to do that's hostile and mean and terrible to somebody who you no longer want to be your friend? Well, she had done it. From that point on, very quickly, Jewish children were not allowed to attend the non-Jewish school, a public school. And at first, we were sent to a building that had been assigned to Jewish children. But the building, unfortunately, was a condemned building. And in one of the classrooms, the floor collapsed. A couple of kids were quite badly hurt. So my parents said, well, no, this isn't going to do. And the only other alternative was there was a Jewish school And Vienna is a big city, way on the other end of the city. And the only way for me to get there was to ride a trolley car to the center of town, then change into another trolley car, and then uh, take that trolley car to where the school was. And I had a good friend who was Jewish, who lived not too far away. So the parents arranged for the two of us to do that. And the first time we did that, there was a parent who took us, but it just wasn't possible for the parents to accompany us. And I'm often asked, was there any heroism? And I really think that the biggest heroism was for my mother, who at that point was a single parent, and I will explain to you why in a second, for my mother to send me off every morning to get on that trolley car by myself, or with my little friend, and in a city that was terribly dangerous for Jews, to travel that distance into what was a dangerous neighborhood. And it was a dangerous neighborhood because it was a Jewish neighborhood. And because it was an older neighborhood, the streets were paved with cobblestones. And if you don't know what that is, ask your teachers. They'll tell you, I don't want to take the top. And it wasn't in very good condition, so the cobblestones could be picked up. The cobblestone is pretty big, it's about that size, very heavy. And there was not a day that we didn't have hoodlums come by and stand in front of the school and curse us out. And very often pick up a cobblestone, heave it through the window. And because we were kind of up a little ways, the cobblestone, the trajectory was such that by the time it went through the window, it didn't go very far. And what the teachers did, and God bless them because they must have had nerves of steel, is they just moved all of the kids permanently to the far half of the room. We sat two or three to a seat, because they knew that the stones could only travel so far once they made it through the window. They broke the window, and then a couple of feet in, they would fall to the ground. And while it was very disruptive, if there was nobody in that area near the window, nobody was going to get hit by the stones. Okay, so there was not a school day that wasn't marked by that kind of thing. Now, let me explain one more thing, and then we can go to the questions. I said that my mother was, to all intents and purposes, a single mother. That was because my father uh, was in prison, and that was his great good fortune. Why? He had been politically active and was arrested by the Germans, but through the Austrian police as a political prisoner, okay, and was held in the prison in Vienna. And what they normally did is, if they had a Jewish prisoner, they would send him off to the concentration camp. He had been active with somebody who wasn't Jewish, who was a lawyer, who had very quickly joined the Nazi Party, who showed up with the swastika. He wore a gold swastika with the gold swastika in his lapel. And he said, I am about to try a very major case. And this man Frosch that you just arrested is my star witness. And if you send him to a concentration camp, then I don't have a case. And he would show up every couple of weeks and say, do you still have my prisoner? And I think he bribed a few people because that's what you did at that time. And he managed to maintain my father in prison and not sent off to a concentration camp. And that ultimately did save his life. Okay. Let me stop at this point and let's go into the questioning part of it. And I'll try to to really stay specific to the things that you've asked.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Weiner. So I'm going to start with a student from Renzulli Academy because they actually have to get off the call earlier than our other school just due to scheduling stuff. And then for question number 2, I'll, when we get to that point, Plainfield, I'll ask for a teacher to put up like a virtual hand or just a note in the chat saying that you have a student who's comfortable asking question number 2.
Okay, I have a request. If you can do this, because I don't really know what your logistics are in the classroom. If you can get close enough to the camera that I can see your beautiful faces, because right now your faces are about 1/8 of an inch tall. Can't see too much.
I can, do you want to see all the screens equally in size so you're not just looking at me largely?
Whatever you can do, yeah.
Well,
I
you would
don't
have
want
to,
to see you, but yeah, I'd love to see the kids.
on your Zoom, like in your Zoom screen, if you go to the right upper right hand corner,
Yeah.
there's a little thing that says view. If you click on that, like upper right hand corner, it says view.
Oh, gallery view, yeah.
If you go to gallery view, you should be able to see everyone equally.
Yeah.
That help. And I pinned you so that
yes,
way.
You are now 1/4 of an inch instead of 1/8 of an inch.
Yep. And I pinned you so that way everyone sees you large and everything else on our end is small. So that way you're the main attraction on the end of our screens. But yeah, teachers hopefully can send students up. Like I actually already see a teacher from student from Renzulli Academy ready to ask question number 1.
All right.
So I'll pass it over to the student.
Did you lose any family members?
You know what? I'm going to ask you to pull your mask down just for a minute so that I can understand you more clearly. Please ask again.
Did you lose any family members?
Did I lose any family members? That, in a way, it takes care of 2 questions, okay? Because I think one of our questions was, what is the worst thing that happened to you, okay? And since we're hurting a little bit for time, I'm going to combine those 2. Yes, I did. We were very lucky that quite a few of my family members survived. And I'm going to qualify survived because some of the family members who did survive the Holocaust, by the time the war was over, we never saw them again. I referred before to an uncle who was both a lawyer and a member of a conductor rather of the Vienna Symphony. He was the rehearsal conductor. And he was in a concentration camp, was able to get out of it, was able to go to England, and he's Jewish, became the conductor for a British church abbey because he was a very good choral conductor for a church abbey. The abbey, unfortunately, was near the coastline. And when England went to war, he was designated an enemy alien. And was sent to a prison camp. And the British took, when the war looked as though there might be a German invasion, they took all of these prisoners in this enemy alien camp. Now he's in England, okay? And he's in a concentration camp. And they sent him to Australia. And where is he in Australia? In another concentration camp. And finally, some people from the Church of England in Australia who needed a conductor were able to get him freed from the camp because he wasn't German, he was Austrian. I mean, the stories are each of these steps was like a major undertaking. And he, because of all these imprisonments, his health was badly compromised. He ultimately died in Australia. None of us ever saw him again. But my grandfather had a terrible death. My father was raised by, his mother died when he was very young, and he was raised by a couple of aunts. They had terrible deaths in concentration camps. So yes, I lost a number of family members through that. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see that we have a hand in Mrs. Albert's class, so I'm thinking they will have a student asking the next question, question number 2.
By the way, you don't have to go in order unless you want to. If you know, it's the student's choice. If you see a question that is of interest to you, just feel free to go to that. There's no sequence there.
Thanks for clarifying.
Did you ever go to a concentration camp?
I'm sorry, I could not hear that. We had some kind of feedback.
Did you go to a concentration camp?
Was the question, did I go to a concentration camp? Okay.
Yep.
No, really, thank you for asking that, because I think there was some confusion about that. No, I didn't, and for 2 reasons. Well, maybe 3 reasons. One reason was because I was very fortunate, but the other 2 was because I was too young. And at that point, they were just concentration camps. They although many people died there, and I think that's very important to understand, but they were not death camps. They were not the death machines, the extremely and immensely successful designs for killing people and doing away with them. That ultimately emerged. At that point, they were work camps. And, you know, they didn't want little kids. They wanted strong men and women. And I was lucky enough to be accepted for the kinder transport and was able to escape in that way. By the way, if you have a follow-up question, if you know there's something about what I say that you'd like to follow up on, you have that ability.
I see a hand in Miss Cohen's class.
Cannot hear you.
They're unmuting.
Yeah, we have to.
There you go. There's feedback there.
Yeah, that happens in the classroom a lot.
Oh, okay.
They'll try their best.
So look in the camera and talk loud.
What was your experience in Kristallnacht?
Oh, okay. No, I'm glad you asked that. If you want to be very, very correct, in German, it's Kristallnacht. The accent is on the 2nd syllable. And my story on that goes like this, that when we went to school in the morning, it was a very, very gray day. You already had a sense of there being something strange going on. And you had the smell of fires, and as we got into the city proper, we could see that they had begun looting Jewish stores and just throwing the contents into the street. And what I found terribly upsetting is, because I was a real bookworm, I love to read, was that there were piles of books and they were being burned. And to me, a book was something that was respected and treasured. And as we came to our school, we found that, you know, there was usually a little mob, but there was a very big mob, and the stones were flying. And we kind of made our way around the side of the school. There was an entrance through an alley. And we went in, but it was very clear that there was not going to be any teaching or learning going on that day. And by about 10:30, we were dismissed, two at a time, out a side entrance into an alley. And we made our way home. And by now, these fires of contents of stores were all over the place. Okay, we got home. My mother grabbed me, and we went very quickly to check on my grandparents who lived nearby. And I had an aunt with a very young baby who lived with them, and the baby was sick. My mother wanted to make sure that the baby was okay because he needed medication and everything. And while we were there, my grandmother, and I have to tell this story because it's so emblematic of the time. My grandmother was a very genteel lady, and she was, kind of small, petite, always looked very ladylike. The doorbell rang, and she answered it, and it was three SA. And one of the SA was the son of a neighbor in the apartment house that they lived in. And he said, and his name was Hans, and he said, "You have to get out of your apartment right now, and you have to move in." And they were trying to get all the Jewish families gathered together in one apartment for several reasons. I won't go into that. And she put her hands on her hips. I think she thought that was going to make her look a little bigger. And I'm standing there just watching all this. I couldn't believe it. And she says, "Now, Hans, when your mother was sick, I came and I took care of you. I fed you. I changed your diapers," which I'm sure his companions were interested in hearing. "And now you're going to do me a favor, and I am not going into that other apartment, and you can do what you want to." And he just looked at her and he said, "Yes, Mrs. Stein," and walked away. And I think that for me has been emblematic of that when you're confronted by something, you don't always have to give in. You don't. And once that whole thing was done with, we very quickly went back to our apartment. We could see that there were two Gestapo men across the street, and the Gestapo really had each neighborhood very closely monitored. They knew who the Jews were, and they watched them and knew what they did. And we very quickly ran into our apartment. We hadn't been in our apartment more than about 5 minutes, and we heard this unbelievable banging on the door. And the only reason the door didn't come down was because it was heavy metal, and they're banging and banging and kicking. And my mother, made it very clear I was not to make even the slightest sound, and she wouldn't either. And we were in what was our living dining room. I sat on the floor on a little corduroy cushion so I could move around because it was a parquet floor. And we sat like that for about 6 hours. And about every half hour, they would be banging on the door, and then there would be footsteps. But we had no way of knowing if those footsteps were really somebody walking away or whether they were just trying to scam us. And that would have been difficult enough because obviously we couldn't eat, we couldn't drink, we couldn't use the bathroom. But the telephone was a wall phone, and it was out in the hallway right near the door. And the phone was ringing about every 15 minutes. And my mother was terribly worried. She thought it might have something to do with my father, or have something to do with, with her parents or family or whatever. But there was no way she could answer it because that would be a dead giveaway. So that went on, as I said, for about 6 hours. And finally, it did sound as though they were walking away. And again, the phone rings, so she let it ring for a reasonable length of time. And then she picked it up without saying hello, which was smart because they had no way of knowing, was it a pickup or was it that the phone just stopped ringing? And the voice on the other end of the phone said, "Don't say a word. I know that you have the Gestapo outside your door. Uh, and what I want you to do is I want you to put on your hat and your coat and be ready to move out in a matter of seconds. Same thing with the child, and give the child a toy to hold in one hand. And prepare yourselves that you're going to have to wear a swastika." It was my father's lawyer friend, and he was literally taking his life into his hands, waiting for the Gestapo to leave. And you know, again, they banged on the door, but they apparently really did walk away. And the moment they walked away, he knocked on the door, his signal he had arranged with my mother. The two of us very quickly slipped out the door. My mother wore his wife's golden swastika. I wore his little girls. They had for party members' children. They had a little swastika with a little edelweiss, which is a little mountain flower, white mountain flower on it. And I had to put that on. And we went walking as if we were going for a lovely evening stroll on a pleasant evening, which it was anything but. And he took us to his house. And I finished the night in bed with his little girl, who was a little bit younger than me. And you know, by the next morning, he took us back to our house, and then you know the story continued. But that was my experience for Kristallnacht. We did eventually go a little later on that day to see our synagogue, which was a beautiful, big old building, a you know, one of those buildings that you take tourists to because it was such a work of art. And you know, it was a couple of centuries old, burnt to the ground. And all but one of the synagogues in Vienna were burnt to the ground. So that was my Kristallnacht experience. I think we have time for one more question, and then I'd like to just say something to them. Okay, do we have one more question?
Thank you. I see a hand up in Mr. Trask's class, and we haven't heard from that classroom yet.
Hi.
You'll just need to give them a second.
Do we
Sorry,
have?
I just wanted to mute the big screen so we didn't get any feedback for you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, that's perfect.
All right, good.
Do you mind taking? Oh, good. He's got the mask off. Good. Hi there.
Hi, you said you were part of the kinder transport, and I was wondering what was the condition of the trains you were on.
Okay, no, I'm so glad you asked that because we haven't talked about kinder transport, and I'd like to do that. Right now, I'm going to give you the name of a book, and I hope that you will. Most libraries have it, and if they don't, ask for it. Tell them to buy it. It's that good of a book. It's called The Last Train to London. The Last Train to London. And the author is Meg Waite, W-A-I-T-E, Clayton, C-L-A-Y-T-O-N. Okay. And what she did is she was able to combine, and not many authors can do that, she was able to combine a well-researched documentary that described one of the two primary leaders in bringing kids out of Vienna. Okay, there was a man by the name of Sir Nicholas Winton, which if you look up the Kindertransport, that's the name you're going to get. And he was British, and he did wonderful things in bringing out kids from Germany. But this woman, her name was Truus Weissmiller, and she was Dutch. And she brought kids out from Vienna. But what this author does is she combines it with two fictional characters, but again, very well researched. And she describes Vienna to such perfection that if any of you read it, you'll know what my life was like. You'll know what my city was like. You'll know what the Kindertransport was like, and all of the details. It's a wonderful book, and it reads. It's a page turner. It reads like a mystery. So enough promotion of the book. The Kindertransport mainly brought children whose parents gave them up, which now there too is absolute act of heroism, because they did not know if they were going to see their kids again. And most of them did not. Most of them did not. Very few of the Kindertransport kids actually were reunited with their families, because the families were killed. Okay. But what's talked about very little was that if you were able to get yourself to England on your own, without, with a parent, with another relative, whatever, then you were still able, if you had been accepted by the Kindertransport, you were still able to be assigned a foster family who would take you on. And the important thing about the Kindertransport was not just getting you there, but it was also the British, well, they called it a permit that allowed you to be in the country. Okay, and that was how I got there. By the time I traveled to England, there were no longer any official transports. So they were able to get me onto the Kindertransport for the permit, but they couldn't, there was no way to get me there. And I was very lucky. My mother was able to go as a household servant. She got that kind of a permit. So she and I traveled to England together, and then she went to the job where she had to work, and I was turned over to my foster family. So that was kind of a variation on the theme of Kindertransport. I'd like to take just a minute before we sign off. There has never been anything quite like the Holocaust, where one group of people tried to completely annihilate another group of people for no other reason than what they did, than they worshipped. That was explained that before. That was the one link. We live in a time when there are many terrible things happening. And one of your questions was, what impact have my experiences had on me as an adult? And I'm not the only one. There are a lot of us who really feel a strong calling, a strong compulsion to teach and to talk about this. And it has to do with the fact that when you've experienced something like this at firsthand and you've survived, you somehow wanted to have a purpose and to have a meaning. And that's why we're talking today. It's the Holocaust was tragically, unbelievably successful. If you look around you, if you were to look at the Holocaust and you had been in Europe, every single person in your room, every single person in your building, every single person in the city that you're in, every single person in the state that you're in, okay? And we're going to keep right on going. We live in New England. So every single person in Connecticut, every single person in Rhode Island, every single man, woman, and child. And that's the demography, by the way, because they didn't stop no matter how old you were or how young you were. Every single person in New Hampshire, in Vermont, in Maine, and that is still not 6 million people. We'd have to borrow some from Massachusetts. 6 million people were murdered. Okay, that's just an almost incomprehensible number. Okay, and we've been asking ourselves, and we as an awful lot of people, how could something like that happen? How could the world let something like that happen? And I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't. I don't. But what I would like to leave you with is this. I'm willing to bet that just about every one of you has a nice smartphone. And that smartphone has a flashlight. And unless you go to an awful lot of rock concerts, you probably don't use that flashlight a whole lot, you know, unless you lose something under your bed or something. But here's the thing. If you were in a very dark place, no windows, no lights, you know you have that flashlight, you can pull it out. And one person pulls it out, and then maybe somebody else sees it, and a second person pulls it out. It's no longer pitch dark. And then a third person pulls it out, and a fourth person pulls it out. And if there are enough people who've got the brains and the willingness to pull it out, you vanquish the darkness. I'd like you to keep that in mind for when it comes to enlightenment about how people relate to each other. Okay? That something like the Holocaust cannot be allowed to happen again. And the only way that it could be prevented is enough people pull out their intellectual flashlights or their flashlights of the spirit and say, wait a minute, you know, I have something that works against that. And if I use it, I won't be the only one. There'll be other people who are going to use it too. And I can change things. And that's the thought that I'd like to leave you with. Now, I think we're at about 11:30.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I did receive a message from Mr. Trask saying that at least folks in his class can stay on until 11:50.
I'm happy to stay as long as you would like.
Okay, so I'll just put it out there to the teachers and students and see if they have any questions that they're still wondering about, or maybe when they heard you talk more, made them think a little bit more. I actually saw hands go up in Miss Albert's class, so if you're comfortable with that, I would like to be able to answer some of those questions.
I am at your disposal.
Thank you. So Miss Albert's class, I'll turn it over to you. They're saying 1 second.
I was wondering.
The feedback is really challenging in the classrooms.
Yeah.
The way the computers are set up and the smart boards can make a lot of it go back. So if you just give them 1 second to figure it out.
I'll hang in with you. We'll get it.
Okay.
So I was wondering through the Kinder support.
You know what? Can they type in the question to you, and then you could just
Give me your question.
would that work?
They can. I did hear Mr. Trask say if you turn the volume off on the smart board while you ask the question, that it eliminates the feedback loop.
I did that. It's not working.
Okay.
Maybe if they could type in the question to you and then you transmit it, would that work?
Yep, I will do that.
Let's do that.
This happens with a lot of our schools. It has to do with the way the microphones pick up on one another. And it is
Sure.
a pandemic challenge that
Marvels of modern technology.
yes. So from Miss Albert's class, they are wondering with the kinder transport, was there schooling?
Okay. What happens is most of the kids who came on the kinder transport went to families, okay? And once they went to families, they were part of that family. If you know anything at all about foster families, that would be about the most similar model. So they would just go to the, whatever school that particular district, and it was a British school. I went to a British school, and it was Christ Church School, and I was obviously the only Jewish child in the school, and I love to sing, and to this day I know the words to all the hymns that none of my Christian friends know, because we had to learn, if it had a second, third, and 14th verse, we had to learn it. And so that would be the schooling that they got. For those few who were sent to, because the original concept for the kinder transport was there was a group of Jewish families in England who said, for the younger kids, we won't have any problems finding families, but maybe for some of the older kids, that might not be the case. But we've got summer camps, and we can house the kids, not hard to winterize, we can house the kids in the summer camps. And in some cases, they set up schools. I know of one case in the summer camps, and other cases, they made arrangements with the town that if the camp was located in a particular town, that they would pay the town to accept the kids in schools. It really varied, but it's for most of the kinder transport kids, it became just kind of a normal life. You learned English, you went to whatever school there was, and somebody did a study, and they performed amazingly. There was a large number of professors and writers and teachers and medical people and scientists. They really performed at an extremely ambitious level. Okay, we got
Thank you.
another question.
Yep, I see a hand raised in Mr. Trask's room. They just need a minute.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
I can, yes.
All right, Jose, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question. What was it like to move away from everything you knew?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I think one of the things that can be very useful about sharing my experience is truly, it's the experience of refugees everywhere and anywhere. And I have no doubt that at least some of you, I don't know, about whether directly in your schools or in your communities, but somewhere, some of you are going to encounter people who are refugees from another country. It's a very tough thing to have to leave, to have a life, perfectly nice, happy, enjoyable life, and to have to leave everything that you feel is rightfully yours. You know, if you were born somewhere, and there's always some type of trauma that's occurred in order for you to have to suddenly walk away, or maybe run away from that. And all of a sudden, for me, the worst thing was not having a language to communicate. I didn't know English. And you have no way of communicating with other people. I was separated from my parents. I was separated, and I knew that, you know, it wasn't good, that there were terrible things going on. I was separated from all the people I loved, and I was very close. I mean, all of these uncles and aunts that you saw before, that was my play group. Uh, and I knew that, you know, awful things were happening to them, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. So that is, you know, what it's like. And you have to kind of reach inside you and overcome that. You have to learn a new language. You go to a new school and you discover you don't know anything. You might have been a, you know, very good student in your original school, but that isn't what's being taught in your new school. So it requires a huge adjustment. And really, let me give you a little bit of a word of advice. If you encounter somebody who's a refugee from another country, if you can learn one or two words in their language, how you say hello, how do you say please and thank you, how do you say can I be your friend? And that's huge. I can't tell you how huge that becomes in their life. And you know, and if they do things that seem to be dumb or weird, well, you know, be a little understanding, be a little bit patient. And if you can't do any of those things, smile. You'd be surprised how important it is when somebody's having a really bad day, and chances are good that that's what they're having. Uh, that if you have somebody who smiles at you on a regular basis, you know, waves to you, that's very big. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I see we have a question from Miss Cohen's class, a hand up from Miss Cohen's class.
We're typing it into
Yep,
the
I'll
chat.
I'll read what you type in the
Okay,
chat.
thank you.
Yep, and then Miss Albert's room, I saw another question came through. So after we get this one from Miss Cohen's class, I'll come to your question.
Okay.
While they're typing, I just want to thank you, Ruth, for sharing it. I'm astounded at like the humanity amongst the inhumane all at the same time. It's too much for me to comprehend. So thank you for sharing. I see Miss Cohen's class just typed their question. Do you ever find it hard to talk about the Holocaust?
That's easy to answer. Yes. But not I have to tell you, at the same time that it's hard, two things. One is when you've lived a long time, you've done other hard things, and you know that, you know, you do it. Even if it's hard, sometimes you don't have much choice. Here I have a choice, and I choose to do it. And the reason I choose to do it is I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you because you are such, especially young people, that you've been sitting now for, you know, for over an hour, and I see your faces, and that's why I do it.
Thank you. So the question that came from Miss Albert's room says, were your new families and communities kind to you?
Basically, yes, they truly were. But they, you know, and if I ever have any feelings of guilt, that's where they are, because they really were kind to me. And the family that offered to adopt me really wanted me, but I did not want them. I had parents, and I just wanted to be reunited with my parents. So that relationship, just never worked out. And yes, there were in England, there were many people who were very kind to me. And also I learned English very quickly. And I loved being in school. I always liked, I know, I liked school. And, so I was happy to be in school, and this was a school, we had a lot of music and we had a lot of art, which were things that I liked, and where language was not, critical. And then England went to war very, very shortly after we came. It was a matter of weeks. And there was just an unbelievable coming together of people, and the town that we were in, because the airplanes started coming to bomb London very early in the war, and they almost always overflew the town that we were in, which is called Ramsgate, and it's on the coastline. And so there were a lot of air raids, and we spent a lot of time in air raid shelters. And that's kind of a world unto itself. And yeah, British people were, they were very good to me. I mean, they were good to each other, so I was just part of that.
Can I selfishly ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
You mentioned how you wanted to be reunited with your parents, and I don't know if you shared with this group whether eventually you were reunited with your parents or not. And also, now you're here in Connecticut. Can you maybe at the tail end here also share how you came here as well, just to give it some like a bit of an arc and closure?
Okay. First of all, let me take the last part of your question because it's germane to the part that goes before. The way you get to America is that somebody issues something called an affidavit. And what's the affidavit? The affidavit says, if this person comes to America, I will guarantee that they will never become a burden on the public. In other words, if something terrible happens to them, I'll pay for everything. They'll never, it may have changed a tiny bit, but that's what it was at the time. We knew we had to leave because it was the only way that we were going to survive. My mother and my aunts spent untold times at the American consulate, which had phone books, okay, for every major city in America. Because like almost every European family, we had cousins in America. Everybody had cousins in America. And they tried to find the cousins and indeed made a connection. And I will tell this story too, because it's, what you said, goodness. There was no one cousin. They were willing to help, but there was no one cousin who had enough money to be able to issue a valid affidavit. And one of the women cousins she got on everybody's case until they all got together, and they created like a little corporation that as a group, they were able to issue that affidavit. Okay, so now we had the affidavit that said, yes, Emil, that's my father, Edith, and Ruth can come to America. They're we'll take care of them. So we had that. But then what you have to have is a quota, and ask your teachers to explain that to you because it'll take me too long. And the quota for Austrian Jews was somewhere in the hundreds. I don't remember the exact number, but it was about 400. It was between 350 and 500. I do remember that. Okay, ridiculous number, because you had hundreds of thousands who needed to leave. So you had to wait. The only way, this is where the important part comes in, the only way that you could get to England was if you were already on the list to go to America. Okay, so that right off the bat, that was a very important thing of how we were saved. I mean, the things that saved your life at that point were craziness. It just, strictly, how the ball bounced. And so we knew when we came to England that we probably would be in England about between a year and a year and a half, and that's actually what it was. And my mother worked as a maid, and my father was part of a group, and he had bribed somebody to become part of that group. I mean, that was how your lives were saved in those days, if you were able to bribe the right person. And these were British people who had been sent over by the British government to put together these transports of Jews who were in danger, in serious danger of being killed, which my father was. But that's how we all got to England, and eventually in England we were reunited. I don't think I have time to tell you that whole story. It's a long story.
It warms my heart to hear that that you were able to be reunited and that you were able to come here. I see students getting their backpacks. So I think, are we at the end of our time, Mr. Trask? Yep. And thank you, Ruth, for your time as well. And thank you, students, for your thoughtful questions and being bold and coming up to the camera and being patient when there was some technology issues. Thank you so much. My pleasure. And just keep to the students, just keep on doing what you're doing. You're doing great. Is there anything else before I end the call, teachers?
I just want to let you know that I will send that, I will share the video from the Google Classroom just directly to you so that your students can, or I'll send you the QR code, Mr. Trask, so the 6th graders can watch as well.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ruth and Stephanie and Esther. This has been amazing. We appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great
Very
day.
happy to do it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, students.
Bye, everybody.